All right, we'll get started in a minute here. We'll give people a couple of minutes to get online. Daniel, are you going to read the emergency declaration again?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, I guess we can get going. We've got pretty many people here, and I suppose some people will continue to trickle in, but that's okay.
So, as permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of January 8th, 2021, the determination has been made that it is not practical or prudent for this committee to meet in person, and so to ensure a transparent and an open meeting as possible, we posted the meeting materials approximately a week in advance. I will provide a recording of this meeting on our website, and if we do take any votes, they'll be taken by roll call. And if you have any issues, please chat to me, or you can email me at the email posted right here. Back to you, Claire.
All right. Agenda changes and announcements. There aren't any agenda changes or announcements to make at this time.
Claire, actually,
so
we're swapping the order of agenda 5 and 6. So just the greenhouse gas project will be presented before the CMAQ applications.
Okay, thanks. So yes, a little change in the order. Now on to approval of the minutes from last time, from January. Thank you, Mark Pistic, for sending in corrections for us. Those have been incorporated. And does anybody have any other corrections, or can we accept the meeting minutes as they are? All right, I don't hear any objections to accepting the minutes as they are. So let's move on to our special guest today. Kyle Othmer from Myovision is going to talk about developments in automated signal performance measures. With that, thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Claire. It's nice to meet everyone. My name is Kyle Othmer from Myovision Technologies, located in just across the border from you guys in a town called Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario. It's about an hour west of Toronto, if anyone's trying to figure out where we are actually located. We're excited to present today. So Daniel, if you don't mind, Olivia is going to grab the screen.
Yes, I've made Olivia a presenter.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to click, but it's not.
Is it grayed out? Is it grayed out, Olivia?
No, it has popped up. I'm clicking on it, but it's not. I don't know why it's not working. Give me a second.
Okay.
Here. Green. Huh.
Uh-oh, we tested our technology yesterday, I swear.
Should have worked. Yeah, should
No,
work.
it should work. Yeah. Like I can see that I've been made presenter and I'm clicking on the window and it just won't, it's not reacting.
The screen button in the bottom of your.
It's still X'd out, but I can see it says you have been made presenter.
Even if it's X'd out, can you click on it?
No,
Hmm.
I can't.
Let me try removing presenting and adding it back.
Sure.
Thanks, Dan.
Or maybe we have to make Doug do it.
That's a good point, Claire, because he was the he logged in first, right?
Right, that's right.
It shouldn't matter. Daniel has the same controls as I do.
Okay, Olivia, I've made you the presenter again.
Let's try this one more time.
Looks like the same thing. I can see it. I'm clicking on it and it's just not.
Why don't you make me the presenter, Dan? I have
Yep.
access to the presentation. Let's try this again.
Kyle, I've made you the presenter.
Yep, here we go.
Okay, yes, and we can see your screen.
Great. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Let's get going. Yeah, we might have some issues with video because we were going to share some videos on Olivia's screen, but hey, no worries. We'll get this going. So yeah, development in automated signal performance measures. It's been a very big push on Miovision's end for, call it, the last 3 to 4 years. You know, SPMs and what we call, you know, we look at signal performance measures and there's a massive amount of data, influx of data. What do you do with all that data? What do you do? How do you retime signals with it? How do you use it most efficiently? And that's what the team is going to share with you guys today, and some of our insights and how we approach signal performance measures. So today, myself, account executive for the state of Illinois, Brent Rogerson is a sales engineer / solutions engineer, and Olivia Babcock is our resident traffic engineer specialist. So without further ado, I will get rolling here. And Daniel, if you don't mind, just keep me honest on time, if you don't mind, as we go through here. Agenda, hardware, and solution overview. So I just want to quickly show you guys our equipment, what we actually install at the intersection. Then we'll get into SPMs and intersection health. And we're going to also give you guys a tidbit of what we're doing on red light running and pedestrian compliance when it comes to safety analytics at the intersection. So I'm going to start just by highlighting our hardware, our ability to do traffic counts, and our ability to detect vehicles and actuate the signal. So let me just first give you guys a visual of what our hardware looks like. As you can see here on the left, this is called the Miovision SmartLink. To the right of that is the Miovision SmartSense. Those are attached to a 360 camera that goes at the intersection on the corner, as well as a TrafficLink web-based portal where everything is stored and everything is managed and viewed. So this SmartLink device is a remote access tool, and it secures wireless communications and LTE comms. We can also leverage third-party comms as well, like fiber or a city's SIM cards. We can install them in our device and leverage them. So this device here is basically aggregating all of the data that's coming off of the controller, MMU, cabinet, and it's taking that data, putting it into our analytical software, and making meaningful reports and meaningful outcomes of it. The device to the right is called the Miovision SmartSense. That's called that's the brains of our equipment. It has 2 computing chips, TX2 computing chips, NVIDIA chips installed in it, and that's doing basically roadside analytics, roadside traffic counts, safety, and an array of different things. Our 360 camera, single point, one camera at the intersection, sees everything, and it does an array of things, which I'll get into. If I go further through the deck here, I'm going to pass the puck over to, as we say in Canada, actually, we'd probably say that in Minnesota and Illinois as well. I'm going to pass the puck over to Brent Rogerson, our solutions engineer, to highlight detection and counts, and just some of those feature sets. Brent, if you don't mind.
Sure, thanks, Kyle. Hey, everyone, thank you so much for having us. So I'll just quickly go through the detection counts part of the hardware. One of the biggest inputs and one of the biggest challenges of getting good outcomes at the intersection is actually inputting high quality data. And so to us, that means beyond just the typical detection zone for actuation, that's looking at all of the entire environment and looking at exactly what is happening in terms of behaviors, as well as the presence of objects. So we start with in the base layer here of your detection and counts. So detection is about the stop bar actuation, so identifying a car coming up to the intersection. But it also lets us detect where are PEDs, where are bikes, where are trucks, where are buses, and really get into the classification of the objects so that we can really understand what is that object doing in relation to everything else in the video here. So you can see on the right just a couple of examples of downtown intersections where we see some high volume and high complexity at the intersection as well. So from here, we can provide that input to the traffic controller to give the controller the information that it needs to optimize locally. But we also collect all of the counts and all of the classifications, everything that are happening into a continuous count program. And so it's pretty robust in the sense of having the right amount of data coming from your intersection at locally at the intersection, running on those graphic processors that Kyle was talking about. You can jump to the next one. One of the main challenges that major cities have in the downtown area and really understanding pedestrian, bike, and vehicle safety at the side of the road is really being able to have a detection system that can truly see enough of the environment, truly see the complexities of high volume of pedestrians, and really be able to track them to an individual movement, to an individual event, and where did they start and where did they end. And you can see here how much can be processed all at the same time from a single point camera in a way that we can fully understand that environment well beyond even what a human eye can see. And so that's the power of having a camera at the side of the road, is really being able to handle these complex scenarios. So jump to the next one.
Yeah, can I flip a quick question to Daniel? Maybe if you don't know, no worries. Do you guys know if the MPO here in Chicago is using a software tool called MS2 to take those counts and to take your kind of portable or permanent counts to store them in a platform?
I didn't.
Tom, Bertha, are you familiar with this?
So the state actually uses MS2 software for data collection and storage. So that's data that we have access to, but we don't have a contract with MS2 ourselves.
Thank you.
So
That's all I wanted to know.
That's an IDOT function.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we do integrate directly into MS2 in a very easy to use way. I just wanted to know that. Thank you so much. I'll keep going here.
Sure.
Thanks, Brent. I'm gonna just hit the next one here. There we go.
So our detection system does count and collect 6 different types of vehicles. It does the light vehicles, your heavy vehicles, buses, bikes, and pedestrians. And so it collects all of those classifications all at once, and we do present them into our continuous count portal, which you see here, where you can look at the volumes throughout the day. You can toggle through the different classifications, understand your bike volumes, your truck percentages, and your true peak hours. And we have a nice robust tool for this to built right into our platform. But if you want access to all of the raw data, if you can jump over the next one there, Kyle.
Yep.
The data is all available to you in our APIs, and you can integrate all of this count data into any system that you have today. So this is actually one of the reports that many of our customers have had access to, and they've been building in looking especially around the COVID-19 volume and trends that are happening at intersections. So this is actually a report from Roosevelt in Michigan, the one pilot deployment that we have, where we are actually tracking the volumes of bikes, cars, trucks all throughout the last year, and to see how in relation did those volumes change throughout COVID and from the beginning of COVID and the relative differences. So the amount of data that's being collected and the amount of data that will be available always throughout this tool will allow you to integrate that into any mechanism that you want and really build into the trend level of information that these systems can collect across an entire network. And so all of that data would be available to you and all provided through the power of the video analytics.
Nice, thanks, Brent. Bennett had a question in regards to bikes in our examples, and he was just calling out that he wasn't, or he or she wasn't calling out that we saw bikes. So we have bikes up here, Bennett. Again, this is a screenshot from our actual platform itself. You can see here bikes are up here in the top. Over 24 hours collected 918 bikes. And down here at the bottom of this this chart, you can actually distinguish, all of these modes of transportation or of classification, and you can actually take them all off and just look at bikes. But yeah, Bennett, if
there is one on the videos on the slide 5, there is one in there.
Oh, was there? Okay, let's try and find it, Brent.
Go back one more.
Go back one more. All right.
If you look
These
in
ones here?
the bottom right quadrant there's one in the front of the lineup there. I don't know if you can see that, but it's actually identified as bicycle.
Oh yeah, there it is in the actual detection zone. Yep.
Yeah.
Right in front of the crosswalk. But yes, Bennett, if you do want any more content around how we do bikes and how we collect bikes, happy to connect with you with offline. Okay, so let's keep going. Just being mindful of time. We got 20 minutes left. I'm going to pass it over to Olivia to talk through SPMs and what we call our new feature called Intersection Health. Yeah, take it away, Olivia, and just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. You can go to the next slide. Perfect.
Okay.
So getting into ATSPMs, I'm going to try to give a high-level overview of our thoughts on ATSPMs, and then get into some fun stuff regarding our new feature, Intersection Health. So ATSPMs, automated traffic signal performance measures. The goal of which is to identify operational issues and opportunities for improvement through access to continuous high-resolution controller data. So the key here is why model when you can measure. Next, please. So basically, the FHWA, as an example, recommends retiming signals at least once every 3 years. So on this chart, if we think of typical signal retiming every 3 years, maybe we're not checking in on that signal or that corridor regularly. We only kind of get feedback on its performance, maybe if we get complaints from citizens. So what that could look like is you kind of see an increase in delay to vehicles at that intersection, basically kind of slipping slowly across that 3-year period, but kind of across the three-year period, it can build up to be quite a bit of delay, increased delay experienced by those vehicles. Whereas with ATSPMs, because we have access, sorry, Kyle, to that data 24 hours a day, we're able to just check back in regularly, more regularly than kind of on a 3-year basis. And we can make changes as we see things slipping or as we see maybe traffic increasing. We can make kind of consistent and continuous updates rather than having to check back in 3 years, where we can keep that delay to vehicles pretty low. So just a quick overview of where our data is coming from so we can have a better understanding of what the data is telling us. So we have 3 main sources of this data. So we look at the signal status from the controller. So that's just getting things like yellow, red, and green timing. And then we have our detector activation. So if you do have stop bar detection, whether it's through us or your own kind of loop detection, we have access to that information. And then as well with our SmartLink, we do have a Wi-Fi MAC address that we can use to calculate things like travel time. So in combination, those 3 data sources provide us with a lot of information. And they provide us with this information. These are our signal performance measures. Some of them are more corridor related, some are more intersection related. So corridor related, things like corridor congestion scans, travel time, and then we get into some metrics that are more related to upstream detection, so approach volume, arrivals on red, Purdue coordination diagrams. And then we have some safety metrics that I'll get into it in a little bit, which are pedestrian compliance at red light running. And then we kind of have some simpler ones like phase interval graphs and occupancy ratio, where we're just reading that from detector information and from the controller status. And then we have our turning movement counts, which Brent did show you earlier. So all of this information can help us to make kind of data-driven decisions and answer questions kind of in a data-driven approach. So some common questions that you can kind of answer include, is the signal infrastructure that you have working as you designed it? So if you programmed a controller with a certain signal timing plan, is it actually spitting out that timing plan, or is there some fluctuation? Or are your detectors actually working? Are they getting stuck on? Are they getting stuck off? We're able to see all of those things. Another really useful one is a complaint valid? So again, if you do get a complaint from a constituent saying, hey, I was waiting at this light for 3, 4, or 5 minutes, they can tend to be a bit dramatic maybe, but you do have the ability to check back in on that data because we're collecting it 24 hours a day. You can kind of go back to that time that they said they were waiting, and you can check and you can say, oh, they only waited for a minute, and that's fine, that's within our kind of standards. Or maybe they did wait for 3 minutes and, oh, that's not acceptable. What can we do to change that delay or that wait time? And then kind of some higher level questions like, are my corridors performing as I'm expecting? If your corridor is coordinated, is it actually coordinated? Is that coordination working? Are your intersections performing to your expectations? Are there kind of some movements that are really performing poorly? Are some movements performing kind of with a lot of excess capacity? And then also having the ability to kind of rank performance. So if you have a lot of corridors, you're able to then rank them based on kind of their performance. So which corridors are in most need of retiming. So you can rank them that way. And then kind of specifically along a corridor, pointing to specific times of day where there are bottlenecks and kind of between what intersections are the bottlenecks the worst, and really just pinpointing where that congestion is occurring. So as you can imagine, with all of that, that's a lot of data that I just talked about for like 3 minutes very quickly. But you can imagine if you do have a big install, quite a few intersections, lots of data coming in. We've heard a lot of feedback from our customers saying, hey, this data is great, but it's a lot. How do I get into the data to kind of find my issues right away? I don't necessarily have the time, I don't have the people, I don't have the resources to be able to dive into that data kind of day to day and find those issues. So what we heard was, please just tell me where the problems are. So what we developed was our intersection health tool. So you can see this is the city of Detroit, obviously a really big install, kind of becomes unmanageable after a certain amount of intersections that we've installed. So you can imagine this is slightly unmanageable. So here we can see right away with our intersection health tool, there's these red exclamation marks saying, hey, there's an issue here. Please look into this. So we've kind of categorized it under 3 different main issues: suboptimal green splits, coordination issues, and phase termination issues. So kind of the 3 higher level issues. And then if you click into one of these issues, you can see, next please, Kyle. It just kind of brings you to the intersection, zooms in, shows you the exact movements that are kind of experiencing the issue, and shows you the time of day where this is an issue. So in this case, this is a suboptimal green split issue, basically meaning some of the movements are operating well, some of them are operating not well. Can we shift some green time from the movements that are operating well to the movements that are operating poorly? And this is happening during the PM on the weekend. So specifically at that time, this is an issue. So that's our latest tool, but moving forward, what we're really looking to do is get into signal retiming on demand. So this is something we're actively working on right now. The ability to optimize and retime traffic signals without the need for any external data collection or optimization software. So basically whenever, wherever, as frequently as you like within our traffic link platform. So Kyle, I think the next one is just a quick video of kind of what we have so far. Hopefully it works. Perfect. So this is the tool as it is so far. We're looking at getting into optimization based on offsets. So you have a corridor here. You can play, it's fine. Yeah, you have the corridor here, and we're looking at offset optimization, and to be able to do that based on kind of certain dates, certain times of day, looking at our time-space diagram here, basically calculating an efficiency score based on that existing time-space diagram, and then giving you a new efficiency score. So you can see the difference here is it was 24% and now it's 37%. So you can see that increase in efficiency from our optimization. So that's something we're actively working on. It's still in the works. We're really excited about it. And lastly, I'm just going to get into some safety analytics, which we do currently have in the platform. Next, please. So why are we measuring surrogate safety measures? So we are measuring red light running, and we're measuring pedestrian compliance. So these are surrogate safety measures, which are leading indicators of safety as opposed to lagging indicators like collision data. So basically, in a considerable number of collisions, the primary contributory cause, so the primary reason that this collision happened, is undetermined. So if we can look at the surrogate safety measures and help to identify kind of why those are happening, then there's a possibility that we can re-engineer or change some things within the signal timing plan or the engineering of the intersection to be able to prevent collisions before they occur. So getting into kind of some context on pedestrian performance. So we're looking at pedestrian performance compliance versus non-compliance, and we define non-compliance as pedestrian walking during the don't walk phase of that pedestrian interval. So the aim here is not to victimize pedestrians, but to generally understand their behavior so that we can accommodate that behavior or we can modify the behavior to make things safer. And we can also understand the spatial behavior of the pedestrian. So where are they coming from? Where are they going? And also make some modifications to accommodate that. And then secondly, our red light running. This one's a bit more obvious. We can see when a car is moving through the intersection, we can timestamp that, and we can look at what was happening with the signal at the same time. So we're able to tell if a vehicle is running a yellow light, if they're running a red light. And then we're able to quantify how often that's happening. So a couple of examples. To start with, we'll get into pedestrian signal compliance. So it was found that crossing against the lights exhibited a crash risk per crossing event, approximately 8 times that of a legal crossing at signalized intersections. So obviously, way riskier behavior to cross against the light than with the legal crossing. So it's important to look at this sort of data. Next, please.
Yeah, just a little context, everyone. MileVision does have an existing pilot running in the city of Chicago. And this is where we've worked with Chicago's traffic engineering team to derive at some of these results. So this is a Chicago-specific example here.
Perfect, thanks, Kyle. So yeah, when we looked at this data, I think a few years back when we were first installed for this pilot at East Roosevelt and South Michigan, we looked at a week of data and found there was approximately 40,000 pedestrians that week. And we found that around 61.5% were compliant, meaning that the remainder were non-compliant. And we were also able to break that down further kind of per crosswalk. So we found that the west crosswalk was the least compliant with 59% compliance. So good to be able to notice which which crosswalk is the least compliant. Maybe there's some engineering reasons why. You can kind of narrow in on where those issues are. And then kind of another way of looking at the same pedestrian compliance data is kind of time of day to see when these problems maybe are at their worst. So here we have our total pedestrian counts. That's this blue line. So kind of a typical pattern that we would see. AM, there's a bit of a spike around 8. Maybe that's when people are getting to work. Then it kind of drops off beginning of the workday, and then it picks up again around lunch. People are going out for lunch, makes sense. And then it slowly drops off throughout the evening. And then the red bars are showing our percent of pedestrian non-compliance. So here you can see the highest non-compliance is at 2 a.m., which if you think about it makes sense, because the likelihood of someone kind of waiting for the light at 2 a.m. when there's not really many vehicles around seems pretty low. So that makes sense. Non-compliance there was 50%. And then it does drop down during the day, which again makes sense. There's kind of fewer opportunities. If people do want to kind of jaywalk, there's too many vehicles around to do so. And they are maybe getting the walk sign more frequently or not having to press the button as much. So that is lower during the day. And then we also have a few videos here. This first video, if it works, is a little bit glitchy. You can just play it, Kyle. You can see basically we found on the west side, the highest reason for non-compliance from what we watched is when the conflicting movement is green, and basically it looks like the two-stage crossing using the median when the other direction is less saturated. So that's what this person is doing here. They don't have the walk symbol, but they just kind of crossed when no vehicles were coming and then waited until no vehicles were coming again and then crossed. So kind of a high potential situation there. And then a question to ask is this median creating a sense of security or a false sense of security and encouraging that non-compliance? And then just another example here is for the kind of north and south crosswalks, where we found that the majority of non-compliance was kind of at the end of the pedestrian phase. So we found a lot of people kind of running to catch the light. So this one is kind of, could have been bad. Yeah, you can see that car that Kyle's highlighting. Luckily that silver car did see the pedestrian running across, so did slow down and stop. But again, could have been a high potential there. Yeah, and then we get into a couple more slides here. This is another way you can use our kind of pedestrian spatial behavior is with this kind of heat map that we have. So you can see kind of exactly where more pedestrians are walking, generally through the crosswalk, which is good, but you can see there's kind of a little bit of cut through behavior or a little bit of kind of jaywalking behavior. You can also see kind of in some photos, that bottom left one, you can see there's some blue cutting across to that median. So again, kind of in line with that, maybe cutting across the median and staying there for a while until there's no cars and then cutting across again. Yeah, so a good way to see where pedestrians are actually walking and whether or not they're actually using the crossing facility. And then lastly, just an example of red light running. According to the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety, 846 people were killed in crashes that involved red light running in 2019. So again, a very important issue to look into. In the same year, an estimated 143,000 people were injured in red light running crashes. So this is an example not in Chicago, but I thought it was a pretty good one. Just wait for 2 seconds, Kyle, to play that. Thanks. So on the right is our actual red light running data. That's what it looks like within our TrafficLink platform. Each of these dots represents a vehicle moving through the intersection. So you can see the y-axis is kind of from 0 to 10, and that's time since the start of the yellow. So we can see the yellow, and then we can see the red, and then kind of as we get deeper into the red, that kind of overlaps with the green of the next phase. So the example here is that really deep red light runner there. That's actually 10.2 seconds after the start of the yellow. So obviously not great. When we see these, or when I see them generally, a lot of the time they are cyclists. But in this, or emergency vehicles occasionally, but in this case, it was actually a vehicle. So I was intrigued to see what happened. And now we can look, you're gonna look at the top left and the vehicle is gonna be moving to the bottom right. You can see the vehicles are slowing down and the eastbound is about to go, but the southbound vehicle does run that red light quite late. So definitely a pretty close call there, and we did capture that data point. Perfect, that is all from me.
All right, thank you so much, Olivia. And yeah, so just to note here, MyVision has the ability to recall video. I mean, if your state, city, county, MPO allow for it, and you actually own our equipment, you do have the ability to recall video up to 7 days. So, you know, you can routinely be coming into your red light reporting and finding these kind of anomalies at the top of the y-axis, and then actually identify what the time of day was and recall your video and timestamp it. Vice versa, we also offer an RTSP feed that can go into a video wall or video management platform. And if you are storing that video on a server, again, you would be able to then match one to the other and actually visualize what the occurrence was. So that's kind of it. This was high level, everyone. It was only 30 minutes. In the event you guys would like to go into a deeper dive with MyVision, we're more than inclined to do so. One thing that I did not note, and apologies for the gentleman on the call, is MyVision is partnered with a distribution company called Traffic Control Corp, also known as TCC, out of the state of Illinois, and they are our dedicated distributor of goods and services, training, boots on the ground, fantastic team, and we're very pleased to be working with them. So yeah, if anyone has any interest, you know, feel free to reach out to the crew at TCC and or MyVision. Hey, my timer's pinging at me, so looks like we were a little over, Dan, but yeah, if there's time for questions, more than happy to field some.
Any questions?
Hi, this is Tom. So I guess I have a question about how whether any communities are out there that are using this technology for overall pedestrian volume monitoring, and maybe integrating that with other vendors that are providing regional models of like pedestrian activity or that sort of thing. So for example, integration with Replica to provide them information that they can use to provide more regional data where we don't have this equipment.
Yes, fair. So I didn't get the opportunity to kind of highlight our robustness of our API. So we do serve up an API for all of our traffic counts specifically. So when it comes to Replica or MS2 or any kind of, you know, Power over BI or customized software that an agency is looking to build, they can inject our API and leverage it. So that's great. We will serve it up to a vendor like Replica, and they would say, okay, thank you for the API. It may need some tweaking or some changing or some engineering.
Have you done that?
We have.
Okay.
Brent, maybe you could comment on that if you'd be so inclined to.
Yep. Yeah, we've integrated with a few different types of platforms. I've seen a few like that have been built themselves. Kyle mentioned MS2. We integrate with them, their account platform. We are in the talks of how to integrate some of this data into systems like the Parsons network. We're talking about how can we integrate them into just general central management systems that have similar applications. So integration is a big part and core piece of our technology in the sense of the open API and the architecture. So while we've done a handful of different types of systems, including locally built or like the city agency building it themselves, it integrates really well, and the API is pretty robust to basically change into whatever we need it to be to integrate to a system that we haven't seen before. So I'd be pretty confident that it would work to whatever you're referring to, but yeah, we've done it into a series of systems as of now.
Hey, Tom, this is Abraham. So CDOT plans to install a number of these devices on Roosevelt from West End to Lakeshore Drive. Our plan is to download all the data into our ATMS through the API, and then we can do whatever we want once we have the data.
Okay.
We have another question about the 360-degree cameras. The question is, do they rotate or do they only really cover about 270 degrees? And if they rotate, don't they miss some data?
So they are a 360 camera. They are physically, they don't move physically. So once you mount them, they stay physically still. But we do have the ability to virtually move around within that video frame. So it's not a physical movement of a device. And so, I mean, maybe the 270 degrees is kind of referring to the angle behind the camera. I mean, that's captured in the video. It's somewhat unusable space sometimes, but if you have a crosswalk zone or something behind the camera, it's fine. It's a 360 camera. As long as it's in the view, we can zoom in, we can rotate. We have all the virtual controls of that 360 view, but it doesn't physically move. It's all virtual use of that video stream.
And another question that we have here in the chat is, outside of Detroit, are there other large cities where there are a network of cameras that you know of?
I can take that one, Brent. So yeah, we have a majority of customers. I'm just to be transparent, Detroit is our largest customer as of today. In our hometown of Waterloo, we plan to install about 80% of the network. City of Toronto, we've installed, we're about to install about 100 devices. I would look at the City of Boston. I would look at Pima County out in Arizona, Florida Department of Transportation, San Jose. These are just some that I would call out, Bennett, but there are more. But again, Detroit is our largest scale, but we are continuously growing. This product's been in the market for close to 4 to 5 years, like call it 4.5 years. So I mean, we are somewhat in the world of traffic engineering. We are somewhat new to the market for a permanent solution, but we're getting fantastic traction and growing quickly. So yeah, stay tuned for more larger scale customers, hopefully in Illinois. But yeah,
I'll probably, if it's Abraham again, I'll probably add, we've been piloting for what, 4 years now, Kyle?
yes.
We've been really satisfied with the data we received and how the system performed. So we are really looking to expand our operations.
Thank you, Abraham. Yes. Hopefully that answers your question, Bennett, as well as Mark. I hope you're okay. Yeah, Mark, some of the things that we've seen, Mark, in regards to the 360 cameras with competitors is there is that blind spot. MyoVision's camera was kind of designed to avoid that blind spot underneath the camera, behind the camera. We do suggest, putting extensions on our device at times to bring them up to the correct me if I'm wrong, Brent, but to the 25, 30 feet height off of the ground. Yeah, we're quite impressed with the view you get. So yeah, we are seeing a true 360. So hopefully, Mark, that answers your question as well as Bennett. Okay, could MyoVision take a moment to talk about your ongoing licensing costs to operate your product? Many detection solutions do not require ongoing license. That's a fantastic comment, Stefan. So yeah, let me talk about that one first. So MyoVision does provide multiple solutions that are deemed as CapEx. In the event that you wanted to buy our solution to get just some generic SPMs, let's say, or our API for SPMs as well as traffic counts, and you don't want kind of the full access of the safety analytics and platform, we do have very simplistic CapEx models that you can just procure, not worry about again, and you know that you have it forever. And with that, you can say, all right, we've installed our device, it's a CapEx price, and I'm going to call up MyoVision and see if I can get a 3-month trial of the full suite, and I would give you a trial of the full suite. And if it's something that you're really leveraging and we can prove at ROI, then we could talk about potentially adding a software license onto that CapEx hardware procurement. So we definitely have models around outside of residual software programs. We also look at times when a customer is really interested in our platform. We can look at providing a platform fee for 10 years, where we can provide some discount waterfalling, and it is, a 10-year subscription, and life of the hardware, is 12 to 15 years. So we typically think a 10-year subscription attached with the hardware will get you to the place that you need to get to. And at the end of the 10 years, again, that hardware would pivot back to a very robust detection system that you can pull counts off of, and you can still leverage our API. So Stefan, I hope that answers your question. In conjunction with TCC and MyoVision, happy to field any other questions that you have around that, but we definitely understand the challenges around SaaS models with government agencies, and we're willing to work with you if that comes. So hopefully that helps, Stefan. Mark, you had a question. I asked because we have a lot of 6-leg intersections in Chicago. Yeah, you certainly do. In the result, Mark, what we do is we do an intersection scoping activity. So we go into Google Maps, we trace adjacent corners of the intersection, we understand the dimensions of the intersection. In the event that an intersection requires a dual camera solution, and by the way, that's maybe one out of 20, in especially Chicago on kind of standardized sized intersections, MyoVision will suggest a additional camera head. But that doesn't mean an additional boxes in the cabinet. We can still leverage the same boxes, devices that go in the cabinet, but it may at times require an additional camera when we are getting blocked out because of our 360. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I've done a lot of scoping in Chicago specifically, and we're really seeing a low percentage of intersections that do require dual cam. I would say, out of, call it 200 intersections in Chicago, I've identified about 10% on the norm require dual cams. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Thomas, your question: does MyoVision have an option to estimate pedestrian counts that include PEDs that don't enter a crosswalk and don't double count PEDs that cross 2 streets? Brent, you're the master at this. I'm going to pass that one to you, because there's PEDs walking everywhere. How do we distinguish? How do we not double count is kind of the question, I believe. And yeah, I think Thomas's question is quite clear.
Yep. So there's kind of two things there. The first part is we do think about the crosswalk in our. We have a zone that does basically your bidirectional counts that we often refer to as the crosswalk zone, and we often look for who's crossing at the crosswalks. However, to your point, that doesn't necessarily capture all of the outside of that zone. So with that in mind, Olivia showed earlier in the presentation what we call the heat map. And so in the background of the device, where we are tracking what are all of the movements and what are the relative balance of where the movement's going, even beyond our count zone itself. So the count zone is like your very specific count from a very specific position in the frame. And that gives you a high quality data point from that particular movement. However, it doesn't give you that sense of behavior that is occurring, somewhat to your point there, beyond those crosswalks. So the way we're thinking about this is kind of layering those two concepts together. One, understand all of the behaviors moving at the intersection to help inform where should we draw the zones. And this gives you a relative activity or relative volume in the sense of, just like the coloring schemes here, you can see where we see the high volume versus where the low volume is. So we're at a level of understanding the relative volumes beyond the zones in comparison, and then that helps us determine where we want to draw count zones. But we can essentially put count zones anywhere we want, so that we can draw an unlimited number of them, and we can provide data from each one of them. So we're thinking about it in the sense of just logically finding the behaviors and drawing zones. Your second question there about double counting PEDs, that's a good one, because that is that is a hard one to really identify a specific person, because we don't quite go to the level of personal identifiable information. That's not something we want to quite cross into. So there is a little bit of a challenge of identifying 2 different data points in 2 different zones and tracking them all the way through, which we do have as a track through the intersection, but we haven't quite defined the difference between the 2 in the data set yet. So that's something we're thinking about as well. So we solved the first part, and we're working on the second part of how to really differentiate the 2 in the 2 different count zones. So hopefully that helps answer your question a little bit.
Thanks.
Oh,
Thanks.
great. No, sorry.
There was just one more question from Thomas that I wanted to potentially call out to Olivia or Brent in regards to what defines a non-compliant pedestrian. How do we define it at the intersection and our determination of pedestrian behavior?
Sure, I can take that if you want. So in our chart, we're really looking at the crosswalk behavior in non-compliant pedestrians. So we're looking at, are they crossing when the walk hand is up, or are they crossing when it's a flashing don't walk, or are they crossing when it's don't walk? And when are they crossing in relation to that signal that they're being provided with? So in terms of compliances, are they using the zone in compliant with the signal that's provided and giving you a relative volume of each scenario? So how many people are crossing when it says don't cross, how many people are crossing in the flashing don't walk versus when they're supposed to be crossing, and giving you a percentage of the utilization of that crosswalk. So to us, a non-compliant pedestrian would be they're crossing when it says don't cross.
Okay, thank you so much, Brent. Thank you, Olivia. Claire, did you have something to comment on?
No, I was just going to thank you for your very informative presentation and invite everybody to get in touch with you offline. So, if they have more questions.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate it. Let me just stop sharing my screen. Okay, Daniel, you should be good to go. Claire, Daniel, thank you so much for coordinating this. Mitch Bright from TCC, thank you for also quarterbacking this. And everyone, have a great afternoon. Daniel, is it okay if the TCC and MyoVision crew log off now? Is that the plan, or would you like us to stay for the duration of the meeting?
You're welcome to stay on. If you'd like to drop off, that's also fine. Whatever works for you all. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
So now we'll have.
All right. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry,
no.
Daniel.
So Martin will be sharing an overview of the greenhouse gas emissions project. And Martin, I have the slides, so just let me know when you want me to advance.
Sure. I think if Jason is on, he's going to kick us off and just introduce everything that CMAP is doing in the climate area.
I am on. Can you see and hear me? Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Jason Navoda. I believe I've presented to this committee maybe 3 or 6 months ago about some of our climate work. And our intention is to continue to come to this committee and give you updates on our progress and where we might be headed and next steps. So that is my intention today, is just to give you an overview, but I'm really just the appetizer for the more interesting information that Martin is going to provide about some of the progress that we've made on a couple of the projects we've been working on this fiscal year. So next slide, please. And then click one more time. So just as you know, to kind of give the foundation here, this is our climate goal, is a region prepared for climate change, and it's within the environment chapter of On to 2050. And we really have 2 primary strategies that we're working on: intensify climate mitigation efforts and plan for climate resilience. Presumably these are, it's clear to everyone on the call today that these are sort of the 2 major parts of dealing with climate change. One is being prepared for the changes that we are anticipating, and the other is trying to minimize those changes through mitigation efforts. Next slide. And so during fiscal year 21, which is the year that we're in now, and we'll wrap up at the end of June, we've been working on 5 different climate projects. This is our portfolio for this year, and I'll briefly explain each one. Before I do that, the 2 that are in orange here are the 2 that Martin is going to present an update for. The transportation mitigation strategies and the GHG reporting and performance monitoring. So let me quickly just explain what each one of these is. The Climate Multi-Year Implementation Planning Project is an effort to look ahead 3 to 5 years and attempt to establish some pathways or some work streams in different areas that we will pursue in order to achieve some goals that are more distant than just what we're going to be doing next year. And I do have one more slide on that I'll get to in a second. The second project, Transportation Mitigation Strategies, is the project that Martin is leading. And that is really an effort to explore what are some of the mitigation strategies that CMAP or the region may undertake, and what would the impacts of some of those strategies potentially be on our emissions in the transportation sector. The third project, Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Technical Assistance. This project is focused on understanding how CMAP may integrate some of its climate recommendations and strategies into our local planning work. So I hope that many of you are familiar with our local technical assistance program and our local planning programs. And so this project is looking at what are the different ways that we can integrate some of these strategies at the local level. And that may be things like updating zoning codes to require electric vehicle charging infrastructure, or to allow residences and other buildings and structures to install solar energy panels, and how do we prepare for greater urban flooding and things of that sort. So that project is really geared towards helping communities to implement some of the climate actions and strategies. The fourth project is Climate Data Inventory and Refinement. In this project, largely this is about looking at the different data sources that CMAP has at its disposal, whether we collect from others and provide that out to the region, or data that we create or analyze and then turn around and provide to the region. What is the world of data that we have, and what of that data might be useful for our partners in doing some of the climate work? So this might relate to urban flooding, it might relate to temperature, urban heat island stuff, and so on. So we're really looking at all of our data resources and figuring out which one of those are appropriate. And this also includes potentially creating a heat susceptibility index for the region, which would follow on and be a parallel project to our flood susceptibility index that identifies areas in the region that may be more susceptible to urban flooding. So we're hoping to do a companion project that's focused on heat susceptibility. And then the fifth project, which is being led by Russell, is to understand what our approach might be as an agency to modeling and monitoring greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. And Martin's going to show you a slide or two on the work that we've been doing in that area. So next slide, please. So this is just a conceptual and very basic graphic of some of the outcomes of the multi-year implementation planning work that I mentioned. Right now, at this moment, we see 4 pathways of work that CMAP will pursue. And this is still in draft form, and it's changing, and this will change year by year. But for right now, these are the 4 sort of work streams that we foresee working on at least next year. And the different projects, like the 5 projects that I just described, fall into one or another of these work streams. So you can see for yourself, transportation mitigation is the one at the top. Obviously, CMAP has a very large stake in the transportation mitigation strategies and what happens in the region. The second one is about strengthening gray and green infrastructure. This is more about resilience and making sure that our infrastructure can withstand greater flooding or greater heat or freeze-thaw cycles and things like that. The third work stream is climate technical assistance, and that's parallel to what I described as providing local technical assistance to our communities and other partners. And then finally, regional climate coordination. And this is sort of, as you know, CMAP is a facilitator. We are a coordinator. We like to bring people together to talk about different issues. And this is really about that. What could CMAP's role be in trying to advance climate action regionally? And what should we be doing to convene different players and trying to move and advance some of our regional climate goals. So you can see I've sort of started to lay out the time frame here, FY21, 22, and 23, and when projects will start and continue. And this is only, as I say, this is in draft form, so it's not complete, but this is sort of how things are conceptually starting to frame up. And then the next slide, please. And so the 5 projects that we are working on currently in FY21 will continue into FY22 starting July. Those are the first 5 that you see listed here. And then we're adding 3 projects this year. One is to look at an electric vehicle infrastructure strategy for our region. We know that the state has some funding oriented towards installing electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we're going to take a look at what might be a good strategy for investing in that infrastructure in our region. The next one is our regional greenhouse gas inventory. As I think many of you know, we have produced a greenhouse gas inventory for the years 2010 and 2015, and then we did some backcasting to produce an inventory for 2005 as well. But it's time for us to do an update to that inventory, and so in normal times we would be doing that update for the year 2020 so that we would have 5-year cycles. We're discussing whether we should actually use the year 2019 this time because 2020 was such a different year for transportation, so we're exploring that as well. And then finally, the last new project that we have is to do a regional transportation vulnerability assessment. And that's essentially looking at our assets and understanding which of those are most critical and which of those might be susceptible to things like flooding or other things, and trying to assess what are the vulnerability points in our transportation system. So that's it for me. I think we'll move on to Martin, and then I think at the end we have some questions for you, but I'm also happy to answer questions about where we are headed as an agency in the next year or 2. So Martin?
All right. So first, I'm going to give a little bit of background about greenhouse gases and the transportation system in the CMAP region. Most of the next few slides were developed by Sarah, who is on the call. So Sarah, feel free to jump in and correct me if I mess this up. So moving on, the next slide. This just shows sort of a profile, the 2015 profile greenhouse gas inventory that Jason mentioned that we are going to be updating soon. But to give you an idea, transportation counts for about 29% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and on-road transportation is about 1/4 of all emissions. So the off-road emissions, a lot of that is construction and mining. So in this region, that's mostly construction. The on-road emissions, those are the ones we can model. And for most of the rest of the presentation, those are the ones we'll be talking about. But other projects are, of course, focused on lowering some of those other emissions, and those definitely have transportation tie-ins as things like As I mentioned, construction, concrete, manufacturing all have a role to play in transportation. Next slide. So this slide looks at sort of the greenhouse gas emissions projected into the future for different transportation modes or vehicle types. Passenger car and passenger truck, those are sort of your traditional cars and your SUVs that people use to get around the region. The orange and green bars are more your commercial vehicles. What we see is that when we do our modeling, the share of VMT at the bottom there stays relatively consistent over time. And trucks and commercial vehicles are a growing share of emissions. This is partially due to how legislation is written and emissions requirements that have been passed and how our model interprets them. But sort of interesting to see that legislatively, at least, we don't expect emissions to decline as fast for trucks as they do for cars. And those passenger vehicles, they're almost 90% of VMT, but only 60 to 70% of emissions. Again, obviously, trucks have higher emissions per mile, which is something that we see playing into our scenario testing results. If we go to the next slide, we know that each of these vehicle types sort of has a different profile, a trip profile throughout the day, which impacts emissions. Weather and temperature also play a role in some emissions and how they are, I'm not sure the science behind it, taken up in the environment and things like that have an impact on the emissions. But we see passenger vehicles having the traditional morning and afternoon peak, with commercial vehicles being a little more consistent throughout the day. Again, this is emissions, not vehicle volumes, but they're relatively well correlated. If you go to the next slide. So Jason introduced, and we are very focused on greenhouse gas emissions. Those are not the only kinds of emissions that are out there, and CMAP actually cares about all the different kinds of emissions that are out there, particularly ones that impact health, like particulate matter, PM2.5. We've highlighted on here the ones that are our main greenhouse gas emissions, so methane and nitrous oxide. And you'll see that trucks have a much bigger impact on methane, where passenger vehicles have a much bigger impact on nitrous oxide, primarily driven by their fuel type. And then some of these other emissions, I think it's interesting, an important note, we often talk about electrifying transportation, and things like brake PM2.5 and tire PM will not go away with electric vehicles. So while this project is primarily focused on greenhouse gases and climate emissions, we are tracking some of those other emissions as we go through the project and seeing how different vehicle types sort of impact those. Next slide. This red line is sort of a projection of greenhouse gas emissions out to 2050. You'll see it declines for a while and then sort of stabilizes and maybe goes up a little bit. That's a combination of mandated emissions reductions and fleet efficiency expiring and the population of the region going up. This blue line, we struggled with what to call this. We're calling it an exploratory target. Paris Climate Accord calls for emissions reductions of 80% overall. We think probably things like electric generation can go down by more than 80%, where other areas such as transportation, where it's going to be harder to reduce, might go down by less than 80%. We haven't set exact targets for those, and that is something we're going to be doing in the next year. So right now, 60% is a number that is out there from some of our partners. You'll see the red line is higher than the blue line, indicating that we are not on track to meet our current sort of this draft target for emissions reductions in transportation. So moving on, I want to talk a little bit about our modeling and some modeling we're doing to explore different strategies. On the next slide, this is sort of how our modeling is set up. Some of you might be familiar with our travel behavior model. Our the bottom green data or labels talk about the data that we can get out of our travel behavior model. So this is vehicles mile traveled, speed, road type, things like that. We take that data and feed it into a model that was developed by the EPA called MOVES. So MOVES takes sort of travel behavior information and applies fleet characteristics to it. So what vehicle type, how old is the vehicle, and how many of each different type of vehicle are expected to be on the road in any given year. And that allows us to project emissions out into the future. So on our next slide, these are two similar studies that we've done sort of in the same scenario development and testing process. One of these charts actually comes from a slide that was presented to RTOC 2 years ago. So on the left is our transit ridership growth study, where we looked at different strategies to grow transit ridership. And on the right is our congestion study, where we looked at different strategies to reduce congestion in the region. And this is we expect this analysis to have similar, I guess, similar formatting, similar concepts and results. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some of the scenarios we hope to test. Some of our scenarios can really be our testing travel behavior. So things like our traditional, all the things we love to test at CMAP are transit regionally significant projects, highway regionally significant projects, more people using transit, changing the cost of driving. Other strategies don't necessarily impact travel behavior, or they don't impact travel behavior in a way that we have mastered in the modeling, been able to incorporate in modeling quite yet. We're upgrading the model, so some of these might come into be a little bit easier to model in the future, but changing the fuel type doesn't necessarily change travel behavior. So electrifying vehicles or using natural gas, just mandating that vehicles be more fuel efficient and things like that. Out of scope for this, we're not looking at land use changes, air transportation, or the electric grid. But those are all definitely important parts of the transportation system impact on the climate. They're just out of scope for this analysis for now. On our next slide, these are draft results. Actually, some of the project team hasn't even seen some of this. So just to give you a little flavor of how we're thinking about this, we're obviously looking at how vehicle miles traveled changes in each scenario and how greenhouse gases change in each scenario, those first two columns. You'll notice that vehicle miles traveled often goes down by more than greenhouse gases. And if you look at the end, this is primarily driven because trucks emit a disproportionate share of greenhouse gases. And many of the strategies, or all of the strategies that we've tested so far, don't have a very large impact on trucks. So their greenhouse gas emissions really aren't changing in any of our scenarios. As I mentioned, we care about greenhouse gases, but we also care about some other emission categories. So we're looking at particulate matter, both for the entire region and in our EDAs, which are economically disconnected areas. So what we're testing for there is a strategy having a disproportionate impact on any certain populations when we test them. Just looking at these results a little, you'll notice that the greenhouse gas impact of many of the strategies we've tested so far are single-digit moves in greenhouse gases, which we need a 60% reduction potentially, and so a 1% reduction really isn't going to get us to our goal. I've got transit ridership on there, so we're seeing that, you know, even our scenarios that force a lot more people onto transit are not having a big impact on greenhouse gas emissions. We've looked at working from home, and 20% of the population, or 50% is sort of our max for the pandemic. But this would only impact work from home or work trips, which is why you're seeing it's not necessarily a pandemic scenario. It's just a high work from home scenario. And that having people work from home is the biggest scenario we've tested so far for impacting greenhouse gases. This final scenario, a carbon tax at $75, that equates to about 67 cents per gallon. And that is, some academic decided that was the level of tax we needed to reach our Paris climate agreement targets. But really that is to some extent more of a revenue generator and allows us to invest in other mitigation efforts. The actual impact of the gas tax is relatively low, is what we've seen. So this is just a flavor, our first draft at testing results, but wanted to get you an idea of how we're thinking about these things and some of the measures we're looking at. We have additional scenarios to continue testing. I think if we go to the next slide. So we're going to continue to model a few of those behavior scenarios, and we're starting to think about how to capture those alternative fuel scenarios. There's a few sketch models that are out there. We've got MOVES, which takes a long time to run, some faster ones that are a little less detailed. But really, much of the literature indicates that alternative fuels are going to be a big part of the solution. So we're definitely interested in those. In the next year, we are going to be setting CMAP endorsed sort of targets for greenhouse gas reductions. And we're going to be recommending policies to go along with those targets. Spoiler alert, any one strategy on its own is probably not going to get us there. The policy recommendation is probably going to be do many things, and pieces of many of these things are going to be part of the solution. All right, I'll stop there. Actually, if we go to the next slide, oops. That's what CMAP's doing. I'd love to hear any questions you have about what we're doing, but I have a question. What is your organization doing to reduce emissions and address climate change? Stop talking for a minute.
So I hope that our participants will speak up here. We are really looking for input about what's going on, especially with You traffic engineers out there, I know that Lake County's looking at traffic signal optimization, optimized for reduced pollution emissions, and I'm sure there's other stuff going on around that we haven't talked about that much.
Hey, this is John Nelson from Lake County, and Claire, you stole my thunder. So
Oh,
was just-
sorry.
I was just gonna say that we are working with the University of Pittsburgh, and we are looking at how to optimize traffic signal optimization for the optimum emission reduction. So instead of looking at strictly at speeds or looking at reducing delays, we're looking at what would it look like if you want to strictly look at emissions as your main item. So we're going through that process right now. The study's been stalled a little bit due to COVID. So it's something they want to do, but it's picking back up again.
I didn't give credit to Claire. Claire and Sarah did a lot of the work that went into these slides. So.
We have a question in the chat about the definition of an RSP.
Sure, RSP, that's the regionally significant projects. So in CMAP world, that primarily means anything that costs more than $100 million or has a significant impact on capacity. Extending rail lines, widening highways, major reconstructions, those kind of things. So in our scenarios, what we did is we said only build the highway regionally significant projects or only build the transit regionally significant projects were two of the scenarios that we tested.
So what we have then is kind of 3 levels. We have, and these are all the constrained projects from Onto 2050. So we either have only build highway versus only build transit versus have both of them and have the highway and transit ones built in a scenario. And that would be the regular 2050 scenario.
All right, we've actually got one more question. Let's see if that can spur a little more conversation. So we're wondering, we obviously think there's a big role for a big conversation around climate change and the climate crisis to be had. How does everyone else feel about the need for that regional conversation, and how do we coordinate or facilitate that conversation?
Any takers? You can always, if you have comments, you can always submit them offline in an email to myself or to Martin.
Hey, Claire, this is Dave from PACE. Yeah, Martin, in answering your question, I mean, there is a need for a regional conversation. I mean, just, appreciate the work that, CMAP's doing, pushing this forward. I mean, for us, in our new released driving innovation strategic plan, we do identify new types of vehicles, battery electric vehicles. We are looking at, you mentioned hydrogen. I mean, Champaign-Urbana is testing, or they will be testing this year, 2 hydrogen buses. So I mean, there's a lot going on in the transit world. The other side with about the climate crisis, a lot of it actually goes back to land use and pedestrian infrastructure, because I mean, for us, if we can't get passengers to our vehicles or our services, they don't have any other options, to get them out of the vehicles, the automobiles. So, yeah, we're talking about, vehicles, emissions and everything else, but a lot of it is old-fashioned planning and land use, and how do we bring that about? And that's something that we've been pushing, for decades of, transit-oriented development, corridor development. So there's basic principles, I think, that need to be further, remembered. And it's not just, the emission benefits and everything else. It's really the planning that we all do in our municipalities and our counties.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hopefully we capture some of that in our technical assistance work. And like I said, I expect our policy recommendations to be somewhere along the lines of do all of the above, including improved land use. Many of the recommendations in On to 2050 along those lines will be applicable not only to quality of life, but also climate crisis and mitigation. So,
if I might, one of the things we're going to want to do is to get specific about who's doing what across the region. And so we'll want to do some inventorying and understand, what sorts of time frames each of your organizations has outlined for yourselves to, if you are taking action to reduce emissions, what's your time frame? What actions are underway? What sorts of investments might be planned or already underway? And that, I know some of you are purchasing alternative fuel vehicles and so on. I think we see our role as sort of understanding what is everyone in the region doing or planning to do, and where will that get us as a region in moving towards this goal of, the exploratory goal, 60%. Well, that's just we're just using a target for no other reason than we just want to have something to compare to. But like I say, we're going to want to assemble and just get an understanding of, oh, well, if everybody does what they say they're going to do, that'll get us X of the percent of the way that we need to get to. So we'll want to do that kind of inventorying, and so we do think that this is one of the best venues to have this conversation about what's happening. But we may need to create a separate sort of group to discuss these sorts of things. Yeah, so we're still interested in hearing your thoughts on both of these questions. Please do chime in. We'll definitely be asking you for more information later.
I think this is John Nelson again at Lake County. I think to that point, if you want to pose questions to our group, I think we can go back to our each individual agencies to get answers for you as far as like fleet vehicles being purchased. I know for myself, I'm not involved on the fleet side, but I can get the answers for you. I know our planning department is doing studies on and looking at single occupancy vehicle study and how to reduce that, and looking at different options. But again, that's not my focus. But again, I think if you want to use this group as your location for the discussion, I think that's where giving us some questions ahead of time, we can get some answers for you would be fine.
That sounds good.
And, not to get on the same old soapbox, but it would be nice, and probably Lake County has some of this study at their fingertips, to try to understand the impact of poorly operating traffic signals has on emissions in the region. Because I do think, as much as we say they contribute a lot to congestion, they have to contribute also to emissions.
all right, well, thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, like I said, if anybody has any thoughts on this later, you can send that to me or to Martin. So on a similar topic, we have the CMAQ project applications. This is even though it's early in the process, we usually do have our talk take a look at the applications and to identify projects that have some fatal flaw or they seem especially good. And Doug is going to do the review of the applications.
Thanks, Claire. So as Claire mentioned, we're in the midst of the call for projects for the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program. So today I'm just going to kind of give a high-level overview and kind of layer down like kind of next steps for involvement with this committee and the evaluation and scoring of projects. Next slide. So the call was for three of the funding programs, CMAQ, TAPL, and STP Shared Fund. We received a total of 121 applications, and it was a little over $3 billion in the total request. Obviously, all three fund sources added together don't even come close to $3 billion, but I think that just shows the type of demand that's in our region for transportation funding. Next slide, please. There were 72 CMAQ applications submitted. I would add that the 72 applications, this is a raw number. We're still going through applications and checking for eligibility under the programs. So it's in all likelihood that there'll be less than 72 that are being considered with the final evaluation and scoring. The 72 applications are requesting $910 million. It's pretty similar to past years. Maybe the total number of applications is down slightly, but the amount being requested is about the same as past cycles. Next slide. You'll see that there is projects are scattered across all the different project types. Obviously, bicycle facility projects received the most, but intersection improvements were at 15, and so were signal interconnects. I would like to draw your attention to two of the projects submitted under the demonstration and other category. Under the other category, the City of Chicago submitted a traffic management center, ATMS added functions project, which was ID 01210010. And then under the demo category, Lake County submitted a Passage Smart Initiative connected vehicle demonstration project, which was 10-21-0007. So those are two particular ones that I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of, in addition to the signal interconnects, intersection improvement, and bottleneck eliminations that we typically highlight for this this group. There were also several or a few transit service projects as well. We did get an advance question on in advance of today's meeting concerning the I-290 bus on shoulders application and whether it was submitted by IDOT or not. Yes, IDOT was the submitting sponsor, but they are doing the I-290 bus on shoulders project in coordination with PACE. But I believe the majority of the funding in the application is for improvements to the roadway and signage to be able to operate bus on shoulders in the I-290 corridor. Specifically, I believe just mainly the DuPage section of I-290, not going through, maybe entering a tad bit into the Cook County, but it's the northwest portion of I-290. Next slide, please. So with the timeline, we're currently doing project evaluation and scoring. Yeah, typically, what would happen is we would finish the evaluation and scoring and make a presentation to this committee seeking your input. Unfortunately, just due to scheduling, the next time our talk is scheduled to meet is middle of July. By that point in time, we should already have a draft program out for public comment. So I just wanted to come to this committee in advance of that. And maybe if we go to the next slide, what we'll be looking at here is we could provide, we will be posting the project scoring and evaluation on the CMAP website. So we could provide to the members of this committee a link to that scoring and evaluation, and invite members to submit comments through email, if need be by telephone, so that we can make sure that we do include, if there are some things that we maybe don't grasp from a project, if there's a fatal flaw or something, a project has importance to another entity outside of the submitting applicant, it may be helpful to do it that way. And as the timeline indicated, we will be looking for a draft program in July. It will also be out for public comment at that point in time. And so you're also free to make comments during that period of time. And then we anticipate, once it gets through all the different committee processes, seeking final approval of the new program at the October MPO Policy Committee and CMAP Board meeting. With that, I think I'm finished. If you have any questions, here's a link to the Call for Projects webpage. We try to keep it up to date with both the listing of the projects, but as we finish the scoring and evaluation, that's where the information will be posted as well.
All right, thank you, Doug. Anybody have questions for Doug? Let's see. I don't think so. All right, well, here we are at our very beloved part of the agenda, agency updates. And there's a lot going on this year for sure. The regional TMC study, the statewide TMC, the Borman Operations Committee, and the statewide TSMO Committee all going on. So I don't know if we have people from IDOT who can address those, but let's just start by asking for volunteers to give an update on what their agency is doing.
Claire, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, Claire, it's Terry Heffron. I'll give an update on some of the central office ITS projects that IDOT's working on. First of all, the Station 1, which is kind of the central clearinghouse for incidents in Springfield, which will be our future statewide ATMS hub. That's been completed. It's fully operational. We're continuing to develop a statewide ITS communications network to connect Station 1 and the other 9 IDOT districts together. The statewide ATMS study, it's moving closer to completion. We have developed a draft concept of operations document, and that's been sent out to our steering committee for review and comment. Our next steering committee meeting will be held on April 26th of this month. After the concept of operations, the next major task will be to define our system requirements. Claire, you mentioned our TSMO program plan. That's been initiated. We're in the early stages, and I don't have an update on that, but I think we're looking at a meeting in the next 2 months. Another ITS initiative, our innovative technology delivery, or ITD program plan top-level design was reviewed and approved by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and that made us eligible to apply for additional truck freight funding for way stations and things like that. We did prepare and submit a grant application to improve our Litchfield way station with a bunch of additional technology we'll see if that grant application is successful. I think there might be somebody from District 1 who can speak to the regional arterial TMC study.
Well, Matt Letourneau is here. Matt, can you speak to the Northeastern Illinois Regional TMC study?
Sure, yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yes, we have held most recently our technical and steering committee meetings. Those occurred in mid-March. We're in the process now of taking that feedback, which included help with the evaluation criteria of different traffic management program element options. So we looked at everything from the leadership role to who might own and maintain equipment as part of a regional traffic management program to personnel involved in the program. We also started to touch on aspects like the traffic management center and whether that would be a virtual or physical center, where it might be housed. So lots of pieces to be decided, but the discussions with the committees were very helpful in bringing us towards some recommendations. So we'll be compiling those recommendations over the next several weeks, and we will be following up in the midterm with a stakeholder workshop, and then follow up conversations with our committees, starting first with the technical committee. Our focus at that point will be shifting over to the concept of operations and talking more about how the concept for the program would come together on sort of an administrative and an operational basis. So a lot of moving pieces, but a lot of great feedback from several folks on this call and others that are involved with stakeholders.
Thank you. Very good. Let's see, Abraham, can you talk about what's going on at the City of Chicago?
Hey, Claire. A couple of weeks ago, we issued a task order proposal request for 7 corridor interconnects on 7 corridors. We're using wireless communication technology. So this is work we started several years ago as separate interconnect designs, and we never completed that. So at this time, we are going to consolidate all those 7 corridor design into one project and complete whatever that was started earlier. That and in a week or so, we'll be starting a new ITS project, traffic advisory system, that's to create a congestion, detour, and truck advisory system for the city. It's more public-facing system, but there are some hardware purchases, including some portable DMS signs with remote communication. So to some way to control part of our active traffic management effort. So those are 2 new projects. Wise, then the Midway Smart Corridor construction is ongoing. It's about 30% done. 2 new signs coming up on I-55. A lot of detection on Cicero, Central, and Pulaski, and collecting all the data. A couple of railroad gate monitoring, collecting all the data and advising travelers inside the airport and folks on the highway, travel times between the airport and the city. And also I mentioned capital bond initiative. Last time, it's the city's major push for infrastructure improvement. We are getting money for ITS initiatives. Part of that, in this year and next year together, we are upgrading about 150 signals with technology similar to what we discussed. We heard from MyoVision earlier, where all these signals will be centrally communicating wirelessly, and we'll be collecting all sort of information and tied that into our traffic management center. So we are fairly busy.
All right. Did you see the question from Tom Murtha? Will the truck route advisory system include the Morgan Street grade crossing in the Stockyards district?
So that's a good question. With the truck routes, we don't have an official truck route yet for the city. So that's something we have to figure out. How do we present this to the public? We only have a proposed truck route. So part of the effort will be to see if that proposed truck route can be formalized and made it our official truck route, or is it more sort of an advisory at this point, or a draft version of it? We haven't figured out. But we do hope to publish a truck route or a map interface.
Yeah. So maybe I should clarify. So so there are very long delays at that crossing, sometimes 20, 30 minutes. Is that going to be one of the areas where you have the DMS to route all vehicles away from that crossing?
So that's not something I have looked at. I know our planning group, the project development group, has been looking at some of those solutions.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, all right. How about Bill Edson or Andy Hines? How's your testing of your central signal systems coming along, or other activities? Is anybody talking?
I'll go ahead and speak. So we're still kind of working out some of the final issues with our system, but we do have our two our server to server connection has been established and it is communicating, and we are able to see each other's signals. There's still some rights issues that we're working through, but our system is we're almost wrapped up. So we're close to being done.
Oh, that's great. Christina in Will County, you're working on your ITS plan. Do you have any progress to report?
We just had recently our second steering committee, and Matt just sent out our I am blanking now. Matt, you want to jump in? What did we just send out?
Yeah, that was sure. Yeah, that was the technology and strategy assessment. So, listing of ITS solutions in a prioritized list based on committee feedback.
Right, and I know we were asking for part of that was additional information we had requested after the steering committee that people helped with evaluations of the different criteria. So hopefully we are still targeting early summer to get that all done so that we can start rolling ITS projects into our TIP. We currently are working on our 2022 to 27 countywide TIP, and there is, just as placeholders, there are, what is that? $4, $5, $6 million set aside in 25, 26, and 27 for ITS projects. We don't know, like I said, since we're not complete, we don't know exactly what those will be, but we are starting to put dollars in our program specifically for ITS projects.
That's great. It's a great outcome of your efforts. Let's see. Tom Murtha has a question for the agencies. It says, we'll be collecting some pedestrian counts this summer. Are there agencies whose signal systems collect and archive pedestrian or bike counts? If so, can you please speak up or contact me? We already heard that CDOT is collecting MileVision data on Roosevelt Road. Anyone else?
And Tom, we do not collect pedestrian counts at our signals, but we do have a couple pedestrian counters out there on different locations on our trail system. If you're interested in that, or you more looking at intersection specific.
So either would be useful, but I was wondering specifically about the intersection operation. So it sounds like the answer is no from the signal systems.
I mean, we can tell you how many times a push button has been pushed, but that could be a crossing guard, one push crossing 30 kids, or it could be one person pushing a bunch of times waiting for the button light to turn green. So it's not really a good pedestrian counter, but we do have that information of how many times they're actuated.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
All right. Let me see. Brad Cousin from McHenry County. Do you have anything to report on that's happening out there?
No, I do not.
All right. Sorry to keep calling on people, but this seems to be the most efficient way. Daryl, Drew, what's happening at IDOT with you?
I think Terry and Pete probably covered the IT areas. Right. We're working on a lot of camera work and systems work, as evidenced by our applications for interconnect. But yeah, I think that's it.
All right, let's see. John Nelson, do you have anything more to add to beyond what you've already said today?
No, we're just construction is underway right now for expanding our system with some more signals and some more cameras, but we're also hopefully starting soon. The contractor should be starting on our Butterfield Road adaptive project, which is a new adaptive system for us, and it also includes the flashing yellow arrows along that corridor. So that's a new ITS thing for us. We're continuing to work with our SPM data. So similar to what we saw from MileVision, we have our SPM solution, and we are working with them to kind of develop some new reporting tools as well. So it should be coming soon. And then just on a bigger project scale, we are kicking off our probably one of our largest projects ever in Lake County history. So it, I don't know if it qualifies for the RSP regional project, but it's should be a large project, a great separation and a widening. So it should be interesting to see where this goes as we kick off our phase 1 here this month.
Okay, John, Steven's asking what adaptive vendor that you used.
That one is being done by Kimley Horn. So it's the Kimley Horn solution.
All right. Let me see. Brian Roberts, you're from Cook County, right? Do you have anything to report? Well, Brian, are you speaking? If you are, you're muted. All right, we'll move on. Mark Pitstick, what's a progress report from RTA?
Yeah, I'll give a quick report. So on Transit Signal Party program, the minutes from the last meeting are still generally accurate. PACE is conducting their 30-day proof of concept test on the Milwaukee Avenue corridor, which includes both IDOT and CDOT intersections. So everything seems to be working, and they're going through the system verification process, and in order to then move on to other corridors, including Dempster Street and Grand Avenue in Lake County, which would be the next 2 corridors. The Grand Avenue corridor in Lake County is interesting because that involves, in Lake County has the Econolite operating system there, and one of the intersections there will allow PACE and IDOT and Lake County to test software that PACE developed a few years ago, which is direct software that's included on the excuse me, the advanced traffic controller, the Cobalt advanced traffic controller. So currently, in many cases for the Trans-Signal Party, PACE is adding new controllers, kind of like Cobalts, but they have to add a separate device to do the translation because the locations don't have a centralized communication system. So this is one location where that will be tested. That will give us in the future two benefits. One is that we would not have to add that extra device, which is their Pages purchasing from Novax. So we wouldn't need that, but we would need to have centralized communication system. And if we have centralized communication system, then that opens up a whole different set of opportunities. Then we would not be reliant on vehicle intersection communication at each intersection, which is very expensive and is limits how much Trans-Signal Priority we can do in the region. So we're looking forward to that testing and see if that works.
Okay, thank you. David Tomzik, do you have anything more to add from PACE's?
Mark, thank you very much for that update. Yeah, generally we are doing more. We had a IDOT a week ago was out on Milwaukee, and we demonstrated the TSP of the cabinets and the recordings. We're still testing, as Mark mentioned, with the 30 days. We're also working with the CTA and for them to be testing on the south end of Milwaukee, and then we're preparing to get the permits for Dempster and like on Grand Avenue also, as we continue to roll out the program throughout the region. We have Parsons is lined up. They're our installer for putting in the TSP equipment, and as Doug mentioned, we applied with co-sponsor with IDOT on the I-290 bus on shoulder project. It'll be similar to what we did with the Edens, where really it was IDOT's project. They did the roadway work and the signage, and then we covered the service. So that we're looking forward to that, and that's generally what we're doing right now. Like I said, we're focusing on TSP, just trying to wrap up Milwaukee and move on to the next corridors.
Very good, thank you. Is there anybody I missed that would like to speak up now?
Kane County has a small note.
Oh, okay.
We've got an adaptive corridor on Randall by I-90. We'll have adaptive turn-on testing beginning next month. That's it.
Oh, very good. All right, well, I guess that probably brings us to the end of our agency updates for today, and nearly the end of our agenda. The next meeting is scheduled for July 15th at 9:30 a.m. Also online, just like this one. And I just want to announce that this is my last meeting of our talk. Next time in July, you'll have another capable person in charge of the committee. I'm leaving CMAP at the end of June, and I just wanted to thank everybody at this group for everything that you've taught me and all your generous help and being patient with me. And I hope next time, the next meeting, I'll be in the audience watching anyway. So thank you all for a good 10 years.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Claire.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Claire.